What does Jesus say? Jesus says that Satan comes but to kill, steal, and destroy. So whatever he brings is a lie and is intended to wipe you out, because that's his goal. But Jesus says, I have come that ye may have life, and that you may have life more abundantly. So, based on that, we know that this Halloween, which I'm going to walk you through practice, started over 2,000 to 3,000 years ago. We know that the area of the country, because people get confused. You had Rome, and as the Roman Empire began to fall, you had people who were considered barbaric in areas that are now known as France and England, and those people were called Celtics. The Celtics, okay? And the Celtics had priests that were called Druids, and the Druids were chief priests of Satan. They were the head of the whole satanic movement, okay? So when you see stories that make references to witches and warlocks, the witch is the female, the warlock is the male witch, okay? And they draw power from Satan and from the practices that he has, from what we refer to now as black magic, from what we talked about when the old scrolls talk about pharmacia. That was the making of potions. If you go back to King Arthur and Merlin the magician, Merlin was a famous character in King Arthur's court because of the magic that he used, okay? And because his sister, King Arthur's sister, used the witchcraft against King Arthur to get pregnant by King Arthur so that she could have a son that would later fight King Arthur for his empire. So you had all of this stuff going on, but behind it all there is Satan. Because Ephesians 6:12, for we wrestle not against flesh and blood, against principalities. These were the principalities that are at work behind the things that are going on. Satan is manipulating people and things. So the Druids were considered, they were pagan priests. They were history's king of the occult. The occult has to do with anything that's satanic and dark. We have today Wicca. We have witches. We have people into Wicca practice. We even have the military, a couple of years ago, trying to decide that a Wicca practitioner could have equal status with a chaplain in the military, and that a chaplain could no longer mention Jesus Christ. Now, is anything more twisted than that? Okay? And all of this is going on right under our nose, and we are just kind of oblivious to what's happening. But this enemy is seeking to gain ground. He's seeking ground in every way that he can, okay? So the Druids had these practices, and the Druids had two chief holidays, okay? They had one holiday which celebrated the birth of spring. Beltran it was called, and it was celebrated May 1st. Now that's very interesting, pagan practices, because when we go back and we look at Easter, remember, and we looked at the Easter bunny and the egg, and we know that rabbits don't lay eggs, okay? So we running around with these little chocolate bunnies and baskets of eggs, and where did the eggs come from? There was no hen in the basket. Last I looked, it was only chickens that were laying eggs, or birds, chickens, and fowls, but not rabbits dropping eggs. And so when we look closely, we find out that the egg, the bunny, is a symbol of fertility because it reproduces so fast. And the egg is a symbol of life because it's the element of reproduction. Women have eggs, and so all of this fertilization of eggs is a part of the symbolic that takes place. And so we have Easter now. So what happened is when we started celebrating as believers the resurrection of Christ in terms of life, Satan comes along and says, oh, but this is a good time. Can't stop this Jesus thing. Can't stop this resurrection. So let me put my spin on it. Okay? So his spin on it gets to be a fertility. It's a time of harvest and planting. Okay? You're celebrating planting. Okay? But what do we celebrate with God? With God we celebrate first fruits, right? And first fruits is when the harvest comes, we give the first of what we have to God. Okay? That was the deal with Cain and Abel. But Satan says, I got to create something that celebrates the starting of this. And the celebrating and the starting of it was created in such a way because within the pagan worship, orgies and wild sex was the foundation. It's what drew people because it appealed to the flesh. It had no restraints. And so what were they doing when Moses came down off the mountain and they had made the golden calf? Everybody was getting all they could because that was that orgy environment that had been created. Even though Aaron knew better because he was priest and God had put him in his position, but he failed to resist. There again, the whole time they're in the wilderness, Satan knows that they're God's chosen people, but he has not stopped trying to distract and destroy and to get them away from God. Because he knows from what was said back in the Garden of Eden that there's a change coming. And what did God say when he pronounced the curse back there in Genesis on both the serpent and on Eve? He said, your head shall bruise the heel of her seed. And woman doesn't have seed. So the seed that God was referring to was Jesus Christ, because the seed of Jesus went into Mary by the Holy Spirit. It was not by man. All right, because man has seed, woman has the egg, but the Holy Spirit brought the seed, so the seed was hers along with what took place. That's why the prediction of the curse was, you shall bruise his head and he shall bruise the heel of your seed. So Satan knew right then, something's coming. And so that's when he started, I got to kill every male that comes along. He tried it in Egypt. When the people went into captivity, what did he do? He tried to kill every male child that was 2 years old. God got a sense of humor. He takes Moses and raises him right in the house of the man who was trying to kill him. They tried to kill Jesus, killed all those male children, trying to get Jesus. But what happened? Before they could come after him, the angel told Job to take Mary and go down into Egypt. And they had enough gold from the gold, frankincense, and myrrh that the wise men had brought. They had enough wealth to go down in Egypt. See, God is always planning ahead. He gave them in advance the wealth that they needed for what was coming. When the people left Egypt in slavery, and they ended the slavery and came out of Egypt, after the angel of death passed through that night, God had folks in a let's get them out of here mode. Y'all can leave today. Take everything you want. Gold, silver, fine cloth, money, we don't care. Just get out of here. Okay? And they left Egypt with great wealth. And why did God have them leave with wealth? Not to pay them back as restitution for 400 years. That wasn't the plan. God ain't dealing in restitution like we're talking about trying to get today. We can get restitution through God if we just pray. He'll restore. It says, the word says he will restore what the cankerworm has taken. But we won't spend the time with him to get back what we've lost. We'd rather take a chance with the lottery and the people next door and all other kind of foolishness and not deal with what he says. And so what happened? God gave them such wealth to leave because when they got out there in the wilderness, he told Moses, I'm going to require an offering of them. And here I've told you before, the three parts that take place when it comes to giving. You got first fruit, you got tithe, and you got offerings. And so what happened when we look back at the word? We saw that the Egyptians who were killed when the angel of death went through, the word is not by accident that God said that the firstborn of everything in the land would die. The firstborn of everything in Egypt was given as a first fruit sacrifice for God's people who were coming out. And that opened the door for them to be blessed in terms of the multiplication. See, God's got an order to this thing. And when they got into the wilderness, and he told Moses to take up an offering, the offering was so that they would have what they needed to build the tabernacle. Well, if we go over into Luke, what do we find in Luke? We find in Luke 6:38, I believe it is, he says, give and it shall be given unto you. Good measure, pressed down, shaken together, running over shall men give into your bosom. And what have I said? I said that the offering is for exchange. And so they gave the offering in exchange for the tabernacle and what God gave them with the tabernacle. So God is still following these principles today, but we have been so blinded that we have gotten away from the principles because we are caught in this spiritual warfare where we don't understand that we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but principalities, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, against the spiritual wickedness in high places. We have forgotten that there's a battle going on. We think that we all on our own. And that if we can't see it, it don't matter. We have forgotten that 2 Corinthians 5:7 says, for we walk by faith and not by sight. And devil says, walk by what you see and not by what you believe. Because if I can get you to rely on what you see, you will never develop faith to believe in anything. And if I can get you to go by what you see, your emphasis will always be subject to doubt and unbelief. And if you are subject to doubt and unbelief, I have kept you away from God. Because the word says that without faith, it is impossible to please him. That's what the word says. So if you don't have faith, you can't please him. And if you don't have faith, your prayers mean nothing, because your prayers go no place. Because the word tells us in James that the fervent prayer of a righteous man availeth much. And for fervent means the sincere, the earnest, the hard prayers of a righteous person yields results. And if we don't pray in sincerity and earnestness, we can't expect results. That's why some of us pray all the time and nothing ever happens. Because we ain't praying right, okay? So let's come on down to this Halloween thing that we are to. Because all of this now, hopefully, is going to start coming together for you. And you're going to see that Satan has a pattern that's taking place. Do you know that the Druid practice I first mentioned, May 1st, that was the practice for the start of the harvest season. The end of the harvest season was November 1st. November 1st signified the end of that time. And November 1st is when there was to be, and there was a great celebration because the time had ended. The celebration involved human sacrifice. The celebration involved all kinds of satanic practices that had been passed down. The whole celebration was called, Satan's name was spelled S-A-M-H-A-I-N, Shamhan. Shamhan was the name that the Druids and the Celts gave to Satan and his celebration. And what happened on November 1st? November 1st was the day of celebrating the closing of time. It was time of all of this witchcraft and activity. And the idea was that on November 1st came that there was a magical opening of the veil between the world of darkness and the world in which we live. Okay? Wow. Now, you say, well, that's strange. We'll hear a reference to a veil. Well, wow. Let's go in the New Testament. There's a reference to a veil on the day that Christ died. Because when Christ was crucified, the word tells us that the veil in the temple, which separated the outer part from the holies of holies, where only the priest could go, that the veil was torn from the top down. And that's very significant. From the top down meant that the tear came from heaven. If it had been from the bottom up, the tear would have come from man. But the tear came from heaven from the top down, so that now, because of the blood sacrifice of Jesus, we have access to him, and we can go into the holies of holies, and we no longer need the man with the rope on it to go in. So then we are seeing a breakthrough. So Satan says, I got to do something about this thing, because I got to get people to understand that you don't have to follow this God that they want you to follow. So what happens? This celebration that the Druids had was about to die out. But in the year 835, there was a Catholic Pope by the name of Pope Gregory IV. And Pope Gregory IV, bless his heart, thought he was doing the right thing. He knew that there had been this cultural celebration, and so they were trying to counter it by having an All Saints Day. And the All Saints Day was to be an All Holiness Day. It was and what Gregory did was he made All Saints Day an obligatory blessed occurrence in the Catholic Church. So that meant that all Catholics had to observe All Saints Day. And All Saints Day was intended to be a time to recognize all the saints who had lived and died, and to pray and to honor them. Now, what do we call the day before Christmas? Christmas Eve. So the day before All Saints Day, October 31st, was called the Eve, All Saints Eve. Now, what do we have? Satan says, got to do something about this. The word hallow, H-A-L-L-O-W. Where did we first encounter it in the Bible? We first encountered it in Matthew 9:6, when Jesus is teaching them what we refer to as the Lord's Prayer. It says, Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed would be thy name. Holy would be your name. Hallow is the word for holy. And so, the eve before All Saints' Day is called All Holy Eve, or All Hallows Eve. All Hallows Eve. And so, over a period of time, Hallows Eve becomes Hallows Even, Hallows Evening, Halloween, Hallow-E-E-N instead of W-E-V-E-N. Halloween it's become. And so now what happens on Halloween? Halloween is the eve before All Saints' Day. So Satan, as we have seen in the past, he's got to have a counterfeit for everything. So if y'all going to make tomorrow All Saints' Day, then I'm going to make this evening All Hell's Night. Okay? So if I make it All Hell's Night, it's going to weaken you for All Saints' Day. Show you a present day parallel. You have Mardi Gras, right? Mardi Gras is a party of the most pagan magnitude you can think of. What's the day called before Lent starts? Fat Tuesday. Fat Tuesday is the last day of Mardi Gras that everything goes. And by Ash Wednesday, everybody is both ashed out, tired, and need 40 days just to regroup. But Satan got his in before you got to the 40 days, huh? So here we have a counterfeit infringement. You see how this is working? He's got things going. Okay, it's going to get even better, folks. Okay? And so what happens then, the label hallow, meaning holy or sacred, is your name, is now Halloween. So Satan and his druids are taking over. And as they're taking over this, they are setting some things in motions to make it work. They decided that this is a very high holy day, a high holy night, that hell is open during that night. And that when hell is open during that night, because of all the demonic activity in the world as they celebrate, the spirits are able to come in from hell into this world. These are disembodied spirits because these are the demons that were kicked out as a part of the 1/3 that were kicked out of heaven with Lucifer. And when they come into this world, they need to find a body to inhabit. What happened when Jesus met the demoniac? When he drove him out of the man's body, they said, let us go into the pigs. Because the pigs stayed in the country. Remember I told you last week? And the pigs represented a transition body so that when they killed the pigs, they were free to go find somebody else to inhabit. You see how this works? And so now, what happened? What happened is this. The spirits are looking for a body to inhabit. All right? And so the people who don't want to be inhabited by the spirits hit the idea that if we put on a mask that looks like a demon, the demons who are looking for a body to inhabit will bypass us because they will think we're already inhabited. Very interesting, huh? If we put on the mask, they will think we already inhabited. Now, where did the idea come from? It came straight from Satan. Because what happens when people put on masks, and you try this with kids, when they put on a mask, they try to take on the characteristics and the personality of the mask that they put on. So the door is open for that spirit to be taken in. But we've been told it's okay. Get a bag of candy, a couple of little trinkets, it's okay. Who are you? I'm a witch. Yeah. And the witch is getting in the door, getting a foot in the door. That's all he needs is a foot in the door, right? Okay, so it is a night of celebrating hell and death. Oh, you wait till I get nailed to the jack-o'-lantern. Oh, all these people with pumpkins, and they knew this. There'd be a trash pile of pumpkins tomorrow. Okay? Why is the pumpkin so important? The pumpkin is so important, and the pumpkin is connected to the beheading that's taking place right now in the Islamic countries. Did you know that? Okay, because to cut off the head of an enemy was considered taking the soul of that enemy. because it was believed that the soul was in the head. And so when they beheaded people, they hung the heads on a stick. You see the movies, the head on a stick. They put the head sometimes around the neck of their horses. They put them in their tents, but they kept that head because that head manifests power over that enemy that had been killed. Because when you looked at the head, you know the body ache wasn't doing nothing. You had them. You got the head, it don't matter where the body is. Every time you look at it, you're reminded, this was my victory. You might be looking at just hanging there, but I'm the one that put you there. So hey, I got the power. You know that song? I got the power. There you go. Cut off the head, make the head the symbol. So in the early days, the heads were key in terms of the Celtic priests and the Celtic warriors as they fought. As the time came down, approaching what Pope Gregory did, and time began to move, they decided that Satan was smart. People might not necessarily keep grabbing the head and sticking it on a stick on October 31st. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a pumpkin, and we're going to clean the pumpkin out, and we're going to carve a face in the pumpkin, the raggedy teeth, the nose thing, because those features that are carved into the pumpkin today replace the earlier carving into the pumpkin. The earlier were actual faces carved on, and everybody couldn't carve a face. So now they carve these holes like that, and they empty out the pumpkin inside, and then what? They sit the pumpkin in the window, and you put a light in the pumpkin, and the light shows out, and the pumpkin's head is really a symbol of death and defeat, because the skull that you find where there is satanic activity is a symbol of death. And so the pumpkin is a symbol of the head, and the jack-o'-lantern is a present-day satanic symbol of the doors being opened and a satanic activity taking place. And we got little kids running around, everybody carving pumpkins, heads and eyes into the pumpkins and the whole bit, and all of that is satanic and it is demonic, okay? And all it has done is that it is a representation of the human sacrifice, and in many places the human sacrifice is still ongoing. In many places. San Diego is one of the witchcraft capitals of the nation. Lots of animal sacrifices take place here, and there probably are some human sacrifices as well. Okay? Now, I already told you what Pope Gregory did in the year 835. He didn't have any idea what he was doing. He made All Saints' Day November 1st, the day before the Halloween. We covered what that is. Then the satanic practices that came along. The satanic practices were intended to be blasphemous, that is, to be against God. And so if God is about life, the night before we're going to celebrate death. We're going to have the witches because they are the queens of Halloween. The jack-o'-lantern is considered the king of Halloween because you don't see Halloween without him. And you say, well, what is all of that? How did we get into all that here in America? Well, some of these practices, before I go to the practice, let me give you trick or treat. Okay, because kids run around hollering trick or treat. Trick or treat. At one point in history, the Catholic Church gave permission, it was called souling, gave permission for beggars to go out and beg people for money. And the money that they begged for was to be given to those people, and they in turn would pray for the folks who gave them the money. If you didn't give them any money, then they had permission to find some way to do some deed against you. And that's where the trick part came in. Okay, trick or treat. You either give me something or I'll find a way to do something to you because you didn't. And so rather than to call it evil, we'll just call it a trick. And we know the other emphasis of the name trick, right? Ain't that what prostitutes call them? Don't they call them tricks? Because, and you think it's an appropriate name because they are being tricked. Suckers, they're being tricked. Without the treats, they're being tricked because they get them. So here we got these terms that we use and we miss where these terms come from, okay? He wants to be like the Most High God. So this is his holy night, All Hallows Night, night before All Saints Day. This is a time for people to praise him and to worship him. Now, We just had a movie come out called The Ouija Board. And I hope nobody in here goes to see that movie. I hope nobody in here goes near a Ouija board. I was somewhere the other day and there were two girls in the store talking. And one was making an observation about having had a roommate down the hall at school that had a Ouija board. And I overheard her say she went by the door, and when she went by she felt uncomfortable. And I just kind of kept going. Some years ago in this church, and I won't name who, there was a person who had a daughter that went off to school. And the daughter ended up with some roommates, UCLA. And the roommates had a Ouija board. And the roommates would be playing with this Ouija board all the time. When she came home on one occasion and mentioned the Ouija board, I told her and the mother that you need to get her out of that room and away from those people. They didn't listen to me. Wasn't long after that, the child started having thoughts of suicide, wanted to kill herself. The mother and the father brought the child to me for prayer for all of them. But they didn't understand that they had opened a door. They had opened a door messing with that board. Halloween opens a door for Satan to come in. Because you dress up, and what better than the children? The children have open spirits. And so what is the church doing? The church has an All Saints Day and allows kids to dress up in nice little outfits and stuff. But that's not enough. Because the church ought to be having a prayer sit-in that carries us through the next day, which is All Saints Day. It should be All Pray Night, October 31st. We ought to be praying like never before. Because when do the demonic spirits come out? They come out at midnight. And where are we at midnight? Sleeping. And they gaining a toehold while we sleep. This is spiritual warfare, folks. Now, I want to give you something. There is a website for what's called the Church of Satan. And I want to tell you what the Church of Satan says about Halloween. Quote, it gives even the most mundane people the opportunity to taste wickedness for one night. Wow. They have a chance to dance with the devil. Wow. I see Satanists all over the world meeting in small groups this night. And Halloween, 500 years hence, to raise a glass to the infernal host. Wow. These people are serious about Satan. And we need to wake up and smell the coffee and stop playing around. Amen. Okay? There's a lady who was a former occultist named Johanna Mickelson. And she wrote a book called Like Lambs to Slaughter. And in her book on page 192 she says, Halloween is also a prime recruiting season for Satanists. A prime recruiting season. You all dressed up like demons. You look like Elvira. It ain't hard to get the guys to follow Elvira. No. Everybody got that low-cut, sexy dress on and everything, and they just get into it, into Halloween. And it's into the church. I've told the story before. When China was a little girl at City Tree School, they had Halloween, and I used to take her to and from school. And I went there one eve after school on Halloween to pick her up. And what happened was, there were parents there in costume. And they had apple bobbing. Okay? Apple bobbing is an old satanic practice because there was a thing called apple magic associated with the Druids in that period. So you got apples in the water and everybody dipping their mouth trying to get an apple, and you just think y'all playing a game for fun. But there's a satanic overture to it. And I'll never forget, there was this one lady there who was dressed like a cave woman. She had on this leopard skin. She didn't have any leotards like women wear when they exercise. It was just all flesh. And it was about 2 sizes too small. And sister was standing up, bending over, apple bobbing. So you about know what she was showing, right? And this is in church. Damn